From NBC5 and NBC2 and the Chamber of Medford and Jackson County, this is the Race for District 2, the U.S. Congressional Forum. Here is your host, NBC5 News Director Craig Smullen.
Good evening and welcome to a special NBC5 United States Congressional Candidate Forum. Last fall, after more than 2 decades in Congress, U.S. Representative Greg Walden announced he wouldn't seek re-election. The move came as a shock to many. The Congressman is Oregon's only Republican representative in Washington, D.C. His second district is also the only one in the state to hold a numerical advantage for Republicans. It's also massive. It's actually larger than most U.S. states, encompassing nearly 70,000 square miles of southern, eastern, and central Oregon. Tonight, we're sitting down for extended interviews with the only 4 candidates whose campaigns have raised more than $75,000, according to the Federal Election Commission's latest quarterly filings. They are all Republicans. In the last decade, NBC5 has been the only broadcast TV station in Southern Oregon to host multiple state and federal debates. We look forward to doing that again for this congressional race, with multiple parties present in the general election this fall. The candidates we'll hear from tonight, in the order they'll appear, are former State Senator Jason Atkinson, businessman Jimmy Crumpacker, former State Senator Cliff Pence, and former State Representative Buehler. That order was chosen by a random drawing with members of each campaign watching remotely. Over the last few days, we recorded extended interviews with the congressional candidates via Zoom. Now, because of the technology, there are occasional and brief connection issues. Let's meet our first candidate, former State Senator Jason Atkinson. Jason Atkinson was a member of the Oregon State Senate, serving District 2 from 2001 to 2013. Previously, Mr. Atkinson served in the Oregon House from 1999 to 2001. He was also a candidate for governor in 2006. Former Senator Atkinson graduated from Southern Oregon State College, now SOU, and earned a master's degree from Willamette University in Management, Business Administration, and Public Administration. He's been a radio talk show host, producer, and host, filmmaker, and management consultant. Mr. Atkinson currently lives in Central Point, Oregon. Jason Atkinson joining us now. Jason, thanks so much for being a part of this.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start, if elected, how will you reach across the aisle to work with Democrats?
Well, as I've always said, politics is a relational business. And when I was in the Oregon State Senate, my office had the best reputation for doing the finest constituent service in Oregon. And in order to be good at that, you have to work across the aisle. You have to work with people. And there's a lot of issues, frankly, that aren't partisan. Mental health is not partisan. Forest fires are not partisan. Getting people the help they need, especially through the Veterans Administration, is not partisan. And a member of Congress, if they're going to be effective, has got to have relationships not only across the aisle, but across the country.
What would you do to encourage economic development in the 2nd District?
Well, I think my question or my answer to that would have been different about 3 months ago than it is today. Quite honestly, the 2021 Congress, the entire focus will be getting the economy back on track. I don't believe anybody thinks that waving the magic wand and all of a sudden we're going to be back to where we were before the pandemic. Right here in Southern Oregon, we are threatened to have as much as 30% of our small businesses go away. We know that the federal bailout that came will not be enough, certainly to sustain us all the way through the end of summer. So this is a case where the federal government has indeed shut business down, where the state of Oregon has followed by shutting down Portland, has shut down the rest of the 2nd Congressional District, and it's going to take a long time to rebuild. I would say, just to answer your question really quickly, number one, making the Trump tax cuts permanent to the individual, that's important. I've never believed and have fought for a very long time to eliminate capital gains taxes and death taxes. And I believe very strongly that you have to have a balanced budget amendment. So there's a tremendous amount of work to do for the next Congress.
On the traditional grade scale of A to F, what grade would you give the Trump administration for how it has handled the coronavirus pandemic?
B plus. As you know, I'm a student of history, and I don't think throughout, whether it's this president or any other president that's faced an international tragedy, that you get it right as it starts. No one understands the size. And, you know, the best thing that the Trump administration has done and Congress has done is tried to move money out of Washington, D.C. back to the states. I was on the phone not too long ago with Congressman Walden about that very incident, trying to get those funds out of Washington, D.C., down to counties like Jackson, Josephine, Klamath, and Lake County. And, those things take time.
Mental Health America ranks Oregon 50th in the U.S. for its access to care in relation to prevalence of mental illness. Given the issues many people will be facing from living in this pandemic, what are your views on mental health funding, and what will you do to advocate for people's mental health?
It's a great question. And for 14 years in the legislature, I was that person that reached across the aisle and got mental health funding completed. I was the one who worked with Senator Abel Gordley to create the Abel Gordley Center for Health and Healing. I was the person who worked with Governors Kitzhaber and Kulongoski to create what was called telemedicine, allowing Oregon Health Science University to start reaching out to rural Oregon in places where we didn't have mental health services. We pioneered that. The insurance companies fought us the entire time, and we were successful. And interesting, Craig, what we created then became the model that Johns Hopkins University used, which then became the national model for telehealth. And as I was talking to a good friend of mine, Dr. Knight Richardson, just a couple of weeks ago, when he and I did that work, we had no idea that it would be used to see patients during the coronavirus. So Oregon is actually the leader in telemedicine because of mental health. And my job as a member of Congress is to make sure that those federal grant monies come to rural counties to serve people.
You're running to be the successor to a 22-year veteran of the U.S. Congress in Greg Walden. What did he do best that you would continue?
I think the thing I admire the most, especially having been in office, is constituent service. Nobody calls a member of Congress with good news. You only call a member of Congress when your lawyer can't fix it and when your pastor can't fix it. And so you never call a member of Congress with good news. And that isn't because you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. It's because your check didn't come, your water got shut off, and you've got a problem that's threatening your business. So Congressman Walden did a fantastic job of constituent service, and my track record in Salem is to do the same. And honestly, I can say the team that is helping me campaign is the team that's going to help me provide, I hope, the finest constituent service in Congress.
What would you have done differently than Congressman Walden?
Well, that's a question I didn't anticipate. I'm not sure, because it's so difficult to. Every Congress is its own chunk of history, and so you can't really go back and say, well, 3 years ago I would have done this different, because I wasn't there. So I think, if you look at times in American history, there are times Congressman Walden has served in the majority, he's served in the minority. He has served under various presidents. And I think that my tenure, hopefully, as a member of Congress, will be to serve honorably. It will be to employ what I believe, which is servant leadership. And it will be to call him as I see him with whoever is President of the United States and whoever is in control of Congress. In my life, I hope this next 4 years it will be President Trump. And I do hope that the Republicans will take control of the House.
I want to ask you about immigration. At an event in Madras, you said that people need to follow the law to get into the country, but, quote, I think there has to be a balance for people who want to work, end quote. What do you mean by that?
Well, agriculture, it really has a tremendous need of having an immigration policy that works, and we don't have that in this state. I wear this on my wrist. This is from a kid that I helped immigrate into the United States legally from Nepal. And he's somebody that wanted to chase the American dream. And I said, I'll help you as long as you do everything legal. If I help you get into the country, you're going to have to spend the time to go through our process of becoming a citizen. And he did. And I'm very, very proud of him. And I think that needs to be open to people. But the process of having open borders, the process of having somebody come here, move here illegally is just, it's not fair. It's something I can't do. No American can leave the country and just move somewhere and all of a sudden get a driver's license or be able to vote. I mean, those are some major issues that we face here. And that's what I mean by people need to follow the law.
All the stimulus money that the federal government is giving out brings to a question the future of our economic security. In 2012, Greece had a national deficit equal to 15% of its GDP, and their economy crashed. Currently, the U.S. national deficit is at least 20% of our GDP. What's to stop the U.S. from becoming the next Greece?
Absolutely nothing. We do not have a balanced budget amendment. in the United States. Congress. Every state has to balance their budget. In my business, I have to balance my budget. My family has to balance our budget. Everyone else has to play by fiscal rules and responsibility. But the federal government can simply print more money. And so what happens is they print more money, the value of that dollar goes down. And when the value of the dollar goes down, the trading power of other countries goes up. My biggest concern, I think, with a lot of Americans is what China's doing. China's a bad actor. Russia's a bad actor. And they have more things they can do to our country with a weak United States dollar. So I agree with your question, absolutely. I am old school, conservative in my belief back to the Ronald Reagan years of supporting a balanced budget amendment. Government has created the crisis that our economy is in right now. Government has a role in getting us out, but I don't want it to be so close to socialism that all of a sudden the value of the U.S. dollar goes away.
Recreational marijuana is, of course, legal in Oregon and more states virtually every year. Should it be legal federally? And if elected, will you work to change that?
That's a hard one. I think there's a role of medical marijuana, but I have a real deep skepticism of legal marijuana and not playing by the same rules. You know, a traditional farmer, a traditional vintner, a traditional person who's growing cows or onions does not play by the same rules that the marijuana guys do. Marijuana guys are using water in ways that nobody else can. They are able to not be taxed because it's a cash business and it's unbankable. And all of the promises that if we just pass this bill will save K through 12 education in Oregon have proven to be not true. So I'm a skeptic, I should say. I think there's some benefit, but what we have right now, the Wild West, I don't think is good policy for the entire country.
I appreciate you taking the time tonight. Thanks very much.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up next, we'll ask businessman Jimmy Crumpacker about his decision to move to District 2 after Congressman Walden announced his decision to retire. Stay with us. You're watching The Race for District 2, the U.S. Congressional Candidate Forum, here on NBC5. Welcome back to the race for District 2, the U.S. Congressional Forum. Let's meet our next candidate, businessman Jimmy Crumpacker. Jimmy Crumpacker is the founder of an asset management firm. He received his bachelor's degree in government from Georgetown University. After graduating, Mr. Crumpacker worked for an insurance company before becoming an energy investor. Mr. Crumpacker currently lives near Bend, Oregon. Jimmy Crumpacker joining us now. Jimmy, thanks so much for taking the time and sitting down for this extended interview.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, of course, with this pandemic happening right now, a lot of focus of this race will be on the economics. What would you do to encourage economic development in the 2nd District?
Well, I think President Trump has done a great job with this unfortunate set of circumstances that nobody could have foreseen come. I think it's a great opportunity for us to look at the assets that we have within the district. I think that the federal government has really had their hands around the neck of a lot of the areas of economic growth. Specifically, I'm thinking about opening up the lands. We need more activity in our forests. I think, when I was a kid, we had 85,000 timber workers. Now we have 25,000. It used to be 8% of state's GDP. Now it's less than 1%. So I think that's an area that if you took down federal regulations, it would have a dramatic impact on employment within the 2nd District. And I think this is a perfect opportunity to take advantage of that.
If elected, how will you reach across the aisle to work with Democrats?
That's a great question. I think Democrats, for the most part, believe in the same things that we do as far as everybody wants strong economic growth. Everyone wants to be safe. And I think now more than ever, we can look at what's happened with this virus and say, we need to refocus on doing things in America. And the supply chains are broken, really. And we need to bring manufacturing back as far as medical devices and drugs. We've seen over the course of the last couple of months, when we rely on China for all of these things, it doesn't work. When you need ventilators out of China and they're not willing to give them to us, it really puts a major strain on our healthcare system. So I think that the Democrats would very much agree that we need to bring things back. So I think that's one way where I could reach across the aisle. And also, we need to work out the issues with the World Health Organization. Obviously, the World Health Organization broke down. The Taiwanese tried to warn the World Health Organization about this virus in December, and they did not heed those warnings because the Chinese government stopped them. So I think that is a way that I would be able to work with Democrats.
Mental Health America ranks Oregon in the U.S. 50th for its access to care in relation to prevalence of mental illness. Given the PTSD that may occur from living in this pandemic, what are your views on mental health funding, and what will you do to advocate for people's mental health?
That's a great question. And, it really stems from the lack of Salem wanting to put money into mental health care. And that is, it's a scary statistic, the fact that we are last in state spending in that. And I think from a federal level, the best way you can do is to try and channel as many funds towards mental health care as possible. It's not only mental health care, but Oregon suffer disproportionately from drug and alcohol related abuse. I think we're in the bottom 5 in all states in those categories. And that's really scary. And you're 100% right. These last 2 months have been very challenging on people. And we just have to hope that Salem would advocate for that. And getting federal funds in that area would be critical. But you need the state government to really lean in as well.
The pandemic obviously has changed our world. On a grade scale of A to F, what grade would you give the Trump administration for how it's handled the situation thus far?
I would give them an A. I think that the Trump administration has done a great job. The amount of resources that they have put behind this so quickly, trying to get money to small businesses, to people who have lost their jobs to no fault of their own, they've done an incredible job. I really do believe that, and the University of Southampton had a study that said if the Chinese had just allowed in investigators and not stopped the information from coming out of China, 95% of the people that got the sickness would not have had it. And so that's something that I really blame the Chinese for. And the Trump administration has done the best job that they can with an incredibly challenging situation.
What do you see as the important issues in Southern Oregon?
I think the important issues in Southern Oregon, like anywhere across the country, are getting people back to work. You know, it is critical to get this economy started as quickly as possible. Every week that we are shut down can have a dramatic impact over the course of the next couple months and years. So I think it's really important to get people back to work. And obviously that answer is new and totally different from 2 months ago. 2 months ago, I would have said that we need to get people into the forest, which I still believe we need to do, which I think can help unemployment, because I believe that the fact that we, over the last 25 years, have not maintained the federally managed land, which is 53% of Oregon, 32 million acres. You've seen incredible amounts of forest fires. Nearly 80% of the forest fires occur on federal land. And that's something that we need to stop because, as you know, the air quality in your region, it's compared to Beijing at times during forest fires. And that is simply unacceptable. And I lay that responsibility on the federal government.
Let's talk about guns. Would you keep current laws as is, or are there any changes you would support?
Yeah, you know, I'm a staunch defender of the Second Amendment. And I'm actually very proud of the fact that Oregon Firearms Federation actually gave me their endorsement. And they are a no compromise defender of the Second Amendment. So, you know, I think that what we have right now, the challenges that we're seeing as far as attacks on the gun industry are unfortunate. So.
Several commercials are running talking about your lack of ties to Congressional District 2. You registered to vote in Deschutes County 3 weeks after Congressman Walden announced he was stepping down. How do you respond to those concerns? And if you do not succeed in this election, will you stay registered to vote in Deschutes County?
No, I understand. I mean, the career politicians that I'm running against, they can't attack me on my policies. So this is the area that they're focusing on. And I would say that, you know, my family moved to your area, to Jacksonville in the 1840s. And actually the Jacksonville Pioneer Cemetery the land was given by my relatives. My family invested in Deschutes County in the early 70s. And we had a second home here, which I spent much of my childhood. And over the last 8 years, when I moved back to the state, I've been splitting time living here. And you know, it's an unfortunate attack, but I love it here. And these are, you know, the people of the Second District and the values here, that's really where my parents wanted me to spend a vast majority of my time. And I really love this area, and I will definitely stay registered here, 100%.
So you don't think voters should have any concerns about your ties to the district?
No, not at all. When your family's been in the district for 170 years, you know, I think it's a little disingenuous to say that we don't have very deep roots here. And the fact that, you know, my family has had a home in the Second District since the early 70s, I think that should squash any doubt as to my love for the Second District.
You're running to be the successor to a 22-year veteran in the U.S. Congress in Greg Walden. What did he do best that you will continue?
I think constituent services. I think he was phenomenal at going out and listening to people's concerns. And this is something that I think is critical in this job. You have to go around the district as much as possible, and you have to listen, because the issues down the southern part of the district are different from the central part of the district, are different from the eastern part of the district. And I think it's critically important that you go out and you listen to people's concerns. And I think Greg Walden has done a phenomenal job with that. I think he's done a great job with veterans. And I really think that that is a critical part of this job. You know, the veterans are overlooked much of the time. And I would really want to focus on my constituent service and really focus on veteran service as well. And I think that he's done a phenomenal job of both.
We're running out of time, so I do want to ask this quick question. What would you do differently than Congressman Walden?
Well, Congressman Walden, because he was a leader in the party, he, had to butt heads together and make compromises. I'm very fortunate because I'm not in leadership. When I get elected, I will be able to really be my own man and really forge what I think is best for the district.
I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much.
I thank you very much. I really appreciate you letting me on your air. This has been a great pleasure.
Coming up after the break, former State Senator Cliff Pence explains what he'll do if elected to boost the district's economy. You're watching The Race for District 2, the U.S. Congressional Candidate Forum. Welcome back. You'll notice in this Congressional Candidate Forum, there are difficulties with the internet connection at times. With some questions similar between candidates, these interviews need to run as live. To re-record any particular segment or question would have been unfair to the other candidates. Now let's meet our next candidate, former State Senator Cliff Pence. Cliff Pence is a former Oregon State Senator representing the 30th District from 2018 to 2020. Mr. Pence previously served in the Oregon House of Representatives from the 60th District in 2008 to 2018. Former Senator Pence graduated from Eastern Oregon State College, now EOU, and earned his law degree at Lewis and Clark Northwestern School of Law. He has been an attorney, a farmer, and a real estate agent. He currently lives in Ontario, Oregon. Let's welcome in Cliff Pence joining us now. Cliff, thank you so much for taking the time.
Great to be here. Thank you.
If elected, how will you reach across the aisle and work with Democrats?
Well, I'm used to reaching across the aisle because, of course, in Salem, in the legislature, I was never in the majority for the 12 years I was there. So you had a choice of either sitting in the corner and yelling no really loudly or reaching across the aisle. So I've had practice at doing that. I would do the same thing in Washington, D.C. if elected.
What would you do to encourage economic development in the 2nd District if elected?
Well, I would make sure that people were aware of all the wonderful opportunities that we have, but I would try to focus on the assets that are here, like timber, minerals, which we have completely ignored for years. And now, given the rare earth situation where China has gathered so much of the world's resources to itself, we need to focus on those that we have here in the 2nd District. So there's a huge opportunity in the mining realm. And of course, we have wonderful agricultural opportunities if we can just store more water. So I'd be focusing on things that are here that we can reemphasize the value of to the United States and the president. I think he'll help us do lots of good things for our economy.
The coronavirus pandemic has changed everybody's world. What grade on the traditional A to F scale would you give the Trump administration for how it's handled it?
Well, I'd give the Trump administration an A, but I would give the bureaucracy a C minus, and I would focus on the CDC, for example, and say they completely whiffed on testing. And I think we lost a full month because the CDC wouldn't get out of the way and let private businesses put together tests. And I think that was a huge and damaging thing to our people and our economy.
Mental Health America ranks Oregon 50th in the U.S. for its access to care in relation to prevalence of mental illness. Given the issues many people will be facing coming out of this pandemic, on top of other issues potentially there, what are your views on mental health funding and what will you do to advocate for people's mental health?
Well, in the Oregon legislature, I was supportive of many different things to try to help address mental health issues, funding being one of the largest. But what we have to do we have to get our economy back running so that we have the tax revenue coming in that will allow us to pay for those kinds of programs. So the focus is really going to be on getting our economy up and running and then having the funds based on existing tax structure to help people with mental issues. And there is a huge need, just as you've said, and I'll emphasize that when I'm elected.
You're running to be the successor to a 22-year veteran of the U.S. Congress in Greg Walden. What did he do best that you would continue?
I think Greg Walden's a friend. He's done a wonderful job. I think his greatest and best trait was listening. He would go across the district. He would listen to people's problems, and he would do his very, very best to help. And he's a very, very smart guy. He worked his way up in Congress to a position of power and was able to use it many ways to benefit us. I think the Steens Mountain, he prevented it from becoming a national park. I think that was one of the greatest things that he did for us. And he's been helping us on the Canyonlands monument to get it headed off also. So he's done great things for land use. He's been a wonderful guy and a wonderful representative.
What would you have done differently than Representative Walden?
Well, not much. He's a tough act to follow. He's done good things. In fact, I would try to mold my career in Congress on Greg Walden's. He is just I'm sorry that we're losing him.
Your commercials and your website portray you as a hardline Republican who will always support President Trump and always oppose Democrats. Who's the real Cliff Bentz, a bipartisan deal maker or a hardline partisan?
Well, the hardline partisan is the foundation of everything I've done. So when I've made deals, it's been without compromising the principles that I stand upon. And so when it comes to putting together deals, I do it in order to protect the people that I represent with everything directed toward protecting those principles.
My next question is about immigration. What steps will you take federally that will benefit Oregon?
Well, the most important thing is to secure the border and help the president finish the wall. And the reason it has to do with having a foundation, again, to build upon when we address immigration in a logical and rational way. But here in Oregon, we have the same problems with folks here that don't have the benefit of paperwork. We need to address that issue as best we can. We also need to address the visa programs for people that work on farms and ranches, and make sure that those programs are working well so we can keep farms and ranches going. The whole situation is changing, of course, because of the virus. But I look forward to working on those immigration issues with the president.
All the stimulus money that the federal government is putting out brings to a question of our future economic security. In 2012, Greece had a national deficit equal to 15% of its gross domestic product, and their economy crashed. Currently, the U.S. national deficit is at least 20% of our GDP. What is to stop us from being the next Greece?
Well, we are fortunate that we are the world's reserve currency, and so as a result, we don't have the problems that Greece faces as a member of the European Union. But there is no doubt that the increasing national debt is a huge problem and one that will have to be addressed. And there's no good answer to it. It requires folks that are going to Washington, D.C. and recognizing that debt is a problem. It's not just a question of turning on the printing press, which I'm afraid my Democrat, the Democrats in Washington, D.C. apparently think that that's all there is to it, because they're suggesting that we use all of these funds for other things, such as fixing the housing shortage and addressing other issues, perhaps single-payer health care, who knows. But that's we need to address the debt, and we need to address it by cutting back on what we're spending as best we can, and then getting our economy up and going to generate more tax revenue to shrink, if you will, the relative amount of debt.
Recreational marijuana is legal in Oregon and in more states virtually every year. Should it still be illegal federally? And if elected, will you work to change that?
So I have opposed marijuana in the Oregon legislature because my district wanted me to oppose marijuana. And personally, I agree with that position. The reason I agree with it has to do with the damage that marijuana does to young men in particular that are under 26. And studies indicate that brain development is still occurring until you reach about 26. And we have not addressed that issue, and we should. So if this is going to be legalized at the federal level, those issues need to be addressed. This state of addiction that we live in here in Oregon needs to be careful in how it addresses issues. You mentioned mental health earlier. Marijuana is adding to those challenges, and we need to address the health issues really carefully.
This has been a tough campaign with a lot of negative commercials running now. Does Oregon's 2nd District deserve better?
Yes, it does. And you'll note that I have not been running negative commercials. My colleague from the legislature, Dr. Buehler, is running negative commercials. He shouldn't be. In fact, it's discouraging to see him go negative. It doesn't surprise me particularly because he must be behind and he's attacking those who are ahead of him. It's unfortunate. I considered him a good friend, but the way he's acting now, I question that.
What, if elected, will be your #1 priority in Washington?
Well, my #1 priority is going to be to make sure issues having to do with my right to life position are addressed. My #2 priority is going to be to address the COVID virus, but the COVID virus is going to make such a huge difference in our lives. It's hard to know where to start in talking about it, but I would work with the president to try to get the economy up and running. That would be right on the agenda as right next to the very top item on the agenda, which I indicated earlier was life.
Many Republicans in Congress are against the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. How do you feel about it, and how can you fix the holes in our healthcare system?
Oh my, well, so I would vote to repeal Obamacare. I would also say that I'm not an expert in that space, but I know that whatever we replace it with has to address and take into account the existing conditions. Of course, we need to drive down the cost of healthcare because there's the main problem that we have, and the cost. Those cost issues can be addressed if we had more doctors and more mid-levels providing care. We also should talk about more competition. It's talked about a lot, but we would do our best to bring more of that into play. We should have insurance companies practicing cross borders. We should also be doing our best to take the medical materials and supplies that are now being produced in China, bring them over here for production, as long as I'm talking about healthcare. And finally, we need to address tort reform so that we don't have our doctors and hospitals so worried that they're doing needless tests to avoid litigation.
We got a lot of questions in. Thanks very much for taking the time.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Dr. Knute Buehler is coming up after the break. What grade he'd give the president for his administration's response to the pandemic as NBC5's U.S. Congressional Candidate Forum continues. You're watching the Race for District 2, the U.S. Congressional Forum. I'm Craig Smullen. Our final candidate tonight is former State Representative Dr. Knute Buehler. Knute Buehler is a physician. He served as the Oregon State Representative for the 54th District from 2015 to 2019. Dr. Buehler was also the Republican nominee for governor of Oregon in the 2018 election. Dr. Buehler studied microbiology at Oregon State University. He earned an MA in politics and economics from Oxford University. He earned his medical degree at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. He currently lives in Bend, Oregon. Let's welcome in Knute Buehler now. Knute, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Craig. Appreciate it.
So if elected, how will you reach across the aisle and work with Democrats?
Well, certainly I have a lot of experience doing that. I believe that you can uphold your conservative values of limited government, freedom, equality, opportunity, and rule of law, and still combine and work together on some of those issues that there's a consensus. And I've done that in the legislature. I signed groundbreaking legislation dealing with our opioid crisis, signed and wrote groundbreaking legislation with regards to giving people access to experimental medication, which is really pertinent now in this coronavirus atmosphere. So I have plenty of experience of working across the aisle, and I would continue that kind of approach when I'm in Congress.
Certainly with everything going on in our economy right now, there's a lot of focus on that. What would you do if elected to boost the 2nd District's economy?
Well, that's really a key question. We've had quite a demand shock to the economy, and now we just have to make sure that we don't have a second supply shock, meaning we can't put all the people who are running small businesses and providing essential goods and services out of business during this shutdown. So we have to support, good businesses, Main Street businesses, and I think the CARES Act, 1 and 2, that President Trump has has signed have been a really good start to keeping our businesses alive. Then we have to grow the economy because we've certainly taken on a lot of debt. And I think the best way to grow the economy and get rid of that debt is to keep taxes limited and low and be supportive of those small businesses and our traditional jobs in timber, ranching, and farming in the district. And that way we can grow ourselves out. Just like we have in the past. After World War II, we took on a lot of debt, and over 20 years we paid it down. And that's the same type of fiscally conservative approach that we're going to have to use in the upcoming 2 decades to get our fiscal house back in order.
The pandemic certainly has changed our world. On a traditional grading scale of A to F, what grade would you give the Trump administration for how it has handled it?
I think an F. I'm sorry. I think an A. Certainly, this has been a challenge for everyone here. At all levels of government, and I think the Trump administration has made some really good moves initially. Shutting down entry from China was a key and important move right away. Directing the stay-at-home order, making sure as much ventilator and other personal protection equipment is distributed throughout the country that they can are great. The communication with Fauci and Dr. Birx has been particularly good. And then the economic response. This is just not about healthcare, also the economic response with the CARE 1 and 2 Act, getting dollars into people's bank accounts relatively quickly, and then also the PPP program, which gets dollars to important businesses that keep people employed. So overall, an A for the Trump administration in this response. And as a physician, I certainly would want to go to Washington, D.C., stand with the Trump team and continue working on this issue. And we have to get through this rough spot. We also have to hold China accountable so this never happens again, and make sure the country is prepared in the future so that we can deal with similar crises effectively.
Nursing homes across the country and in Oregon have seen a tragic loss of life due to COVID-19. What steps should Congress take, if any, to provide better transparency into the rate of illness and death in these facilities? And is additional regulation needed for infection control and use of PPE?
Well, certainly that kind of regulatory and reporting is needed to be done at the state level. It's not the role of the federal government to get down into the individual nursing home level to do that kind of reporting and in regulatory oversight. But it is the role of the state of Oregon, and I think it has not been done well. The Brown administration has not been transparent, certainly initially with regards to the number of infections and the locations in our nursing home. There's been scattered communication with regards to process and protocol. And when I'm in Congress, I'm certainly going to be providing input to the Brown administration of what should be done. But I think operationally that needs to be done at the state level.
Mental Health America ranks Oregon 50th in the U.S. for its access in relation to prevalence of mental illness. Given what many people are going through with this pandemic and mental health, what are your views on mental health funding, and what will you do to advocate for people's mental health?
Yeah, certainly. I'm greatly concerned about the overall mental health of people in this corona epidemic environment with the stay-at-home order. People cut off from their friends and family, and there's going to be a big need for more support. Unfortunately, Oregon's underfunded our mental health care system for decades, and we see the effects of it with some of the highest suicide rates in the entire nation. When I'm in Congress, I'm going to make sure there is targeted dollars to improve mental health care in Oregon, specifically for our veterans, which is a role that the federal government really should have a preeminent role in taking care of our veterans' mental health, in addition to the physical health, which the VA administration has done for decades.
Oregon Right to Life is spending a lot of money to defeat you, citing your campaign for Oregon governor 2 years ago when you ran as a pro-choice candidate. You're now emphasizing your vote in the legislature against taxpayer-funded abortion. Are you trying to have it both ways?
Absolutely not. I'm pro-choice, but I'm not pro-abortion. That has been my stand from day one that I entered the Oregon legislature. I think it's possible to make abortion rare, and that has been my record in voting in the Oregon legislature. I voted against the most important abortion bill in the Oregon legislature that Governor Brown wanted to pour millions into providing abortion access to people who are here illegally and expand those abortion services. I was a solid no. Just like in Congress, I would vote to defund Planned Parenthood. I'm against late-term abortions, and certainly I would support the Hyde Amendment, which prevents federal funds used for abortion. I think that's all consistent with my views of being pro-choice, but wanting to make abortion as rare as possible. And remember, Craig, when I was in the legislature, I wrote and passed groundbreaking legislation to increase access to contraception in Oregon, which has markedly decreased the number of abortions in Oregon. So my record on this issue is rock solid, and I'm proud of it to say that I'm pro-choice, but I want to make abortion as rare as possible.
You're running to be the successor to a 22-year veteran in Congress, and Greg Walden. What did he do best that you would continue?
Access. Greg Walden set a very high bar with regards to providing access to the district. Greg traveled extensively. He was always available. He always showed up. So I would just steal shamelessly from Greg's approach in terms of constituent services and being in the district. I do think, though, we can learn from what's occurred with the corona epidemic, being able to communicate like we are now through Zoom and telephone town halls. So when I am stuck in Washington, D.C., I think we have all learned that we can also leverage these new technologies to provide even closer contact. So there are some silver linings to this epidemic, and I think that's one that we can build on the great experience of Greg Walden of showing up, but also leverage technology when I am in Washington, D.C. to maintain those close connections with people in the district.
What would you do differently than Congressman Walden?
Well, the one thing that I would do differently is I would be that conservative voice, that thoughtful conservative voice, pushing not only back against Nancy Pelosi and AOC against such things as the Green New Deal and government takeover of our healthcare system and open borders, but I'd also use the platform of being a member of Congress to push back against Governor Brown and the excesses that we see in Oregon, the massive tax hikes, the bad legislation like cap and trade, and the infringements of our Second Amendment right. I think there is a platform, a way to communicate and push back and be that conservative voice for Oregon, a voice that I think is really needed and for all too long has been missing.
Now, this has been a contentious campaign with several attack ads. Doesn't Oregon's 2nd District deserve better?
Hey, the attack ads bothers me a lot. I think it's important to get the word out with regards to people's record and behavior, especially at this time of the epidemic where it is hard for the fourth estate, the news media, to ask those questions. So it's important to have people's records fully disclosed, and that's what we've tried to do throughout the whole campaign. You know, we've had numerous telephone town halls all across the district. We've had remote candidate forums and debates, and it's been a wonderful experience talking to people and getting the word out about all the candidates' records.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to join us. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Craig.
Coming up next, we're breaking down the other important contests on your ballot when this NBC5 U.S. Congressional Candidate Forum returns. Welcome back to NBC5's United States Congressional Candidate Forum. Well, we've spent the better part of the last hour hearing from candidates for one federal race. There are many important items on your ballot. In Jackson County, voters will consider the creation of a new taxing district. If approved, it will build a new county jail to replace the decades-old one. You'll only get one chance to vote on Medford's plan to build a roughly $60 million aquatic center. If voters approve raising the hotel occupancy tax in the city, Medford will be only a few steps away from increasing the public utility fee, about $30 a year, to start construction on the facility in West Medford. That's not all. Oregonians will elect a new Secretary of State this year. We may also see new county leadership in Southern Oregon. Positions on the Board of Commissioners in Jackson, Josephine, Klamath, and Curry County are also up for grabs. Ballots must be in drop boxes by 8 p.m. next Tuesday, May 19th. Please remember, every vote counts. We hope you stay with NBC5 and NBC2 throughout Decision 2020, your place for election coverage. On behalf of all of us here at our NBC5 studios, good night.
From NBC5 and NBC2 and the Chamber of Medford and Jackson County, this has been the Race for District 2, the U.S. Congressional Forum.